Michael Bourque became the MEMIC Group's second president and CEO in the company's history in 2017. Mike previously served under founding president John Leonard for more than 2 decades, culminating that time as senior vice president for external affairs and corporate secretary for the MEMIC Group. In that role, Mike led the company's corporate marketing programs, including its advertising and public relations, outbound communications, as well as its government and community relations efforts. Mike is a graduate of the University of Maine with a bachelor's degree in journalism. He is accredited in public relations, APR, by the Public Relations Society of America, and an accredited workers' compensation professional, WCP, as recognized by AMCOMP, AMCOMP. In 2004, he was named winner of the Edward L. Bernays Award, the top honor from the Maine Public Relations Council for career achievement in public relations. Before joining MEMIC, Mike was an editor for a trade association based in Washington, D.C. Previously, he was an award-winning journalist working for daily newspapers in Maine and Alaska. Welcome to the PR Maven Podcast, a podcast all about growing your network and building your brand through traditional and digital networking techniques. I'm Nancy Marshall, the PR Maven and CEO of Marshall Communications. I've been strengthening brands through PR for over 35 years, and now I'm celebrating the success of executives, influencers, business owners, and entrepreneurs from all around the world, all of whom have cultivated their brands and broadened their networks through traditional and digital networking methods. Each week, I interview one of these interesting and influential individuals and provide an opportunity for you, the PR Maven Nation, to gain insights from their strategies and stories. So stay tuned for this week's episode, and thanks for listening. So, Mike, to kick things off, tell us about your career and how you got into it in the first place.
Well, it's a roundabout way, and certainly, as a president of an insurance company, it's a prominent role in this community. It's a prominent position, and it's not something I ever aspired to or ever thought I would do. And the truth is, there are not a lot of people who grow up and say, I want to go into insurance. That's really what I want to do. Turns out it's a great career, and it has been. But how did I get there? My degree's in journalism. I wanted to be a newspaper reporter from the time I was probably in middle school. My uncle had been a sports editor of a small newspaper here in Maine, a daily newspaper, and I thought he had the greatest job ever. He'd go to games, get to write about them, enjoy the game, and then come home. What a deal, and get paid for it. So I went to the University of Maine, got a degree in journalism, worked at the Daily Maine campus. It was a great experience. It really did set me up to be the beginning of my career. I worked for the Sun Journal of Lewiston as a reporter on University of Maine sports for them, so I got paid to do that while I was in school. It was great. And then took my first job, looked around the country, really. I was looking for circulation of a certain size, of at least 35,000 or more was my goal, a daily newspaper. Looked up and down the East Coast and sent a couple of letters off to Alaska. And said, well, I had covered hockey at the University of Maine. I said, they must have hockey in Alaska. I really didn't know much about what I was applying for. I got a nice handwritten note back from one of the newspapers in town, the sports editor, who said, this is great. You look like you've written about hockey, but usually we want somebody with 5 years experience. So get some experience and be back in touch. I said, all right, well, at least I got through to the guy, The next day I got a phone call from the other newspaper in town in Anchorage. He said, I see you've written about some hockey. I'd like to talk to you. So we did an interview on the phone. He was a slow-talking Texan. He had gone to Alaska to work on the pipeline originally, but he was a journalism major from Odessa, Texas, and eventually found his way into the newspaper. Anyway, we had this interview. At the time, you would do the phone calls to Alaska would bounce off a satellite. So there was a delay in everything that was spoken. So he was a slow-talking Texan, and there was this delay. And so we did the interview on the phone, and I hung up, and I was like, well, that sucked. I'm not getting that job. And the next day he called me back and said, I have a plane ticket and a job for you. So when are you coming? So I did. I went there and worked for about a year and a half as a sports writer there. Great experience, really great experience. Met a lot of great people, lots of people who had not come from Alaska. They all had a story for how they got there. Covered some really interesting sports, met some interesting people, sort of found my way. We were all writers. So really you were, sort of the beginning of Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours of, just writing. Came back to Maine as a newspaper reporter again for a few years, both in sports, and then decided I should grow up and maybe do some news. So I did news for a while for the Journal-Tribune. And one day I remember looking around the newsroom and not seeing any old, happy reporters. And I started to think, is this really a long-time career? What could I do with this skill that I developed? I feel like, I was a decent writer. I had communicated and, learned that. And so I started to look at PR and communications jobs and said, okay, maybe that's what I would do. And the first thing I did, actually, I was getting married at the time. So I took a job in Washington, D.C. for the American Association of Community Colleges, which it was a PR job. So I was learning that industry. I was in D.C. It was great. Again, sort of trade publication work, a lot of writing. We were when we were going to get married, ultimately back in Maine in 1995. We were looking to come back, and I found my wife to be at the time found her job, and I was looking for something and found a job with this company called MEMIC as a communications specialist. And 25 years later, here I am. I've been the president and CEO now since 2017, so it's in my third year as the president. The last before that, I was the senior vice president of external affairs, director of communications. All of those sort of made my way up through the business. It's not a traditional way to work your way into the insurance industry by any means, but in fact, there aren't a lot of people who sort of follow a traditional path that are in the industry.
Well, I also know that you are a very good speller because we were among the finalists a couple of years ago for the Portland Press Herald Spelling Bee, and you did win. And I ended up being in third place, which really kills me. And then they canceled it for a snow day or something, some lame excuse like that, because I wanted to go back and try to beat you.
Right. I remember this well, and as I recall, I'm still the reigning champion because there hasn't been another contest. And frankly, I'm not going to say that I arranged for the weather, but we'll have to ask Lisa DeSisto to see exactly what's going to happen
I'm going to be seeing her later tonight, so I will ask her about that.
Well, that is. I'm spelling. Obviously, it comes from my writing background, and long before spell check was really as prominent as it certainly has become in our lives. Long before texting, where apparently spelling doesn't matter, and apparently parts of speech don't even matter. Having just watched Jeopardy the other night. But anyway, that training, taught me a lot of things that are useful to this day. I mean, and lots of other things that have been useful, turned out to be very useful in my career.
Well, and I know you're also a reader, and that obviously helps inform pretty much everything, but I know it helps you as a speller also.
That's right. Yeah.
And a writer.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you do it for work, I think you take a special interest. I read for enjoyment, absolutely, but you also read a little more deeply as you once you've been a writer and been a professional writer. I mean, I think people who write journals and the same thing personally probably gain that same experience. But certainly for me, becoming a consumer who was felt even more informed and interested in sort of, okay, how did they construct what they constructed? How did they write what they did? You can't help but look inside what has been written when you've done that kind of work, I think.
Yeah, well, I admire you for all of that. And I know you're also a runner, so you're very well-rounded.
Well, thank you. I think you are as well, Nancy. You're a person of the world, in my opinion.
Well, I must say, I remember seeing you at Maine Public Relations Council's events, a long time ago, 20 plus years. And you were always kind of that young guy,
What happened to that guy anyway?
I'm dating myself now. But then it's like, wow, when I saw that you were rising in power at MEMIC, it's like, wow, he grew up. He's got a lot going on.
And he lost his hair. Yeah, all of that. Yeah, that's true.
Well, you have made the most of losing your hair. I don't think it's held you back one
good.
bit.
Hopefully, it's been added distinguishing characteristic somehow.
Totally.
Yeah,
In my opinion, yes, totally. The PR maven believes that.
That's good. Well, it is it's funny. I mean, obviously, I'm fairly tall, and I do stick out in a crowd a little bit with a bald head. It is funny when I look. You look at crowd pictures, where I go, okay, there I am, right there.
Right.
I can see where I am.
And you just own it.
Yeah, have to.
Yeah, right.
That's right.
So if you were to provide a how-to tip for our listeners in PR, marketing, social media, or personal branding, what would be your best how-to, something that people could take and apply in their jobs today?
Well, this is I think it's universal to succeeding at work, but it again goes back to my journalism career, and it's something that a bit of advice that I give all new employees. We meet with new employees every couple of weeks. We have an orientation at MEMIC, and the senior management team meets with them. And one of the things we tell every single person is be curious. But for me, that's a step further. I always say in my career that I've always kept my reporter's license to ask questions. And I open up my wallet and I go, it's right here. There's my license. I'm going to hold on to this forever. I have the license to ask questions. Truth is, all of us have the license to ask questions. And the benefit that you gain from asking is that, one, you learn something. But the secondary part that's incredibly underrated is that you honor the other person by assuming that they know something of value to you, and you then have to listen, of course, to their answer. But that exchange is incredibly valuable, and then repeating that over and over and over again builds a network, builds a conversation, builds knowledge. All of it is productive and useful, and to me, it's been, I think, the single most important thing in my career. It sort of even goes back for me, I mean, being able and willing to talk to most anybody. I think it's a networking skill. It's another skill. It's certainly one that you have in spades. But mine, I think, goes back to my time as a newspaper delivery boy. I was a newspaper carrier in northern Maine, in Aroostook County, of the Bangor Daily News. When I was, actually, my son was just asking me this. I think I took my my daily paper route when I was 9. And delivered 40 papers, and then on Saturdays had to collect the money. And you had to have a conversation with adults. And sometimes it was, I had one section of my route that was a senior citizen housing place. So, these folks were lonely. And the paperboy was coming. They were going to talk to me, and they were going to catch up with what might be happening in town. So I had to, make sure I had read the paper a little bit before I arrived, and I maybe knew what was happening in town or at school. And I was a link for them, and I came to realize that those conversations were valuable. It got me an extra 25 cents sometimes as a tip, but it was also a great experience.
Well, we mentioned Lisa DeSisto already, and I think we're going to have to mention her again because I know she's always looking for newspaper carriers.
Yes, that's right.
And we could say that this is part of the path to being the president of MEMIC.
There you go. That's see, you're always thinking like a marketer. There's her. That's right. That's what she needs, her testimonial.
Well, I was always selling things in my neighborhood growing up also because my parents were pretty frugal. They wouldn't give me, I didn't have an allowance or anything. I had to make the money. So I was always out selling things.
Well, we did have an allowance, but we also had a chart that my father would make deductions if you didn't do your chores. So there was a chart with Tom, Diane, and Mike, and there was like a minus 15 cents for missing something or another, and he would go check about things when he came home, and to him it was all funny, but for us it was we always were protesting that whatever the latest deduction off our maybe 75-cent allowance was. 15 cents, that was a big deal.
Yeah, right, yeah. Exactly. Mm-hmm. Wow, he sounds like a pretty tough guy. But you said he did it in humor.
He did. He thought it was fun. He thought we would always protest, and people who would come into the house loved it because they'd always see how we were doing. Neighbors and friends would see what you lost 25 cents this week? What happened?
Now tell me, Diane was the only girl. Did she figure out how to sort of kiss up to your dad? And
at some level. I mean, she's the middle child, so she has her own challenges there. I'm the oldest. My brother is the youngest. We were all in pretty close proximity to one another. So we were. My sister is only 13 months younger than me, and then my brother is another 2 years behind her. So we were all in high school together. We were all in college at one point as well.
Yeah. Nice. Well, I'm the youngest of three. I have two older brothers.
I
was
can
the only.
tell.
You can?
I think so. I mean, I would say your personality is that you gotta shout to be heard, and you will. You'll keep talking.
And I also I figured out how to. I mean, I kissed up to my father to get
that
what
would
I
also
wanted.
work. Also work for the daughter.
And
That's
for
right.
that reason, my oldest brother Walter, I think he hates me still to this day. Well, I don't know. That's probably a strong word, but kind of resents a little bit.
Yeah.
So, because he always played by the rules, anyway, but that's not the purpose of our interview today. So let's talk about measurement. Measurement is always a tough word in PR and marketing. How do you measure at MEMIC success in PR, marketing, and social media?
That's a really good question. I don't think it's something that we're especially good at, but certainly we look in various categories of things that we do. So we think we are trying to reflect our brand in certain ways. So whether it's about being the safety experts, the workplace safety experts that we are. So whether it's sort of topically around that, whether it's around being a great place to work, because that's certainly an important set of audiences for us, future employees. Or whether it's influencing something in the world of insurance that we want to influence. So we think about all of those things, and we sort of think about separate audiences for those. And we think about community, our own PR, community involvement, sort of reflecting the communities that we're in. And so we've sort of looked topically at the things that we're making sure that we're expressing ourselves topically in the areas that we want to be on a regular basis. And then we're looking at, how much engagement are we gaining from that? You can see simply in likes and shares and all of that. But they have different value, and they're in some ways different sets of audiences. So making sure that we are finding something for each of those audiences that we feel like are important to the company. When we last developed our website, one of the things that one of the personas that we reflected was the safety geek. And we were saying, okay, they may not buy insurance, but they influence people who buy insurance the way we want to sell it, which is associated with the important service in workplace safety and attention to workplace safety and interest in innovating in workplace safety. And so, there are some of the blogs that our people put out that are really targeted. They're likely only to be interesting to 3% of people, but they're an important 3%. And so to judge what you do simply on sort of the size of the audience is not necessarily always the most important thing. The quality, I think, is also a place where you make a difference. And certainly there are. To the degree you find influencers who you associate with, the value of those connections is greater than the college student who's looking for a job who comes in and engages somehow. Not that they're not, because that's, like I said, attracting employees is a hugely important thing in this market, in our business.
Well, that speaks to the fact that sometimes when you have a PR story, you might want it in the New York Times because that's the biggest paper.
Right.
But sometimes the Quaddy Times might be the best paper. If you're trying to target a certain demographic, and you're going to get only 20 readers. Mm-hmm. But if those people are all going to act on something that they read, it's better to be in a small weekly paper than
right. Yeah,
national.
if you're trying to cite an aquaculture farm, for instance, you want to be with those people talking to this. I mean, you can talk to the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal and have people talk about how this is an amazing technology that you're developing. But if you are going to be thwarted by those 25 abutters in Eastport, then you better be able to make those the quality of that influence work for you. And
right.
I think that's a perfect example. And not to mention, in a place like Maine, you might find your next investor when you are in the Quaddy Times, because they're there on vacation and they're enjoying the coast of Maine, where like so many people do from New York and Boston and Washington and Philadelphia.
Yeah, very good point. I do feel like people who are exposed to Maine on vacation or going to summer camp or even college are often likely to want to invest here because they just love the place. It's got such a strong brand.
And I think they recognize, they see it outside of sort of media stereotype when they come and visit. And I think that's important, that they do see that there are more than lighthouses and lobsters and moose. There's more going on, and they also see the potential, which truly creative people see potential, and I think people are more and more.
When you started to say the word potential, I thought you were going to say potatoes. Because we have potatoes also.
We also do have potatoes and broccoli and blueberries. And, yeah.
And potential.
Yes, and potential.
Yeah. And actually, wasn't that great news that Northeastern University is going to be opening a technology campus here?
Yeah, everybody said game changer. And I think that's the kind of thing, $100 million investment in a place like Maine goes a long way, for one thing. But secondly, signals that this is a place worthy of investment, which I think will lead to more. That's usually how it works in that world. And I think the potential people are seeing, and I think the connection to Northeastern, I think I'm on the University of Maine Board of Visitors. I'm a graduate of the University of Maine, and the University of Maine was, I know, in talks with David Rue as he was developing this idea. And, he seriously thought about it, but fairly quickly he determined that he wanted to bring in an outside partner. The good news is the University of Maine and I think UNE and Thomas College and USM too, I think, will create partnerships with this arrangement. So basically we're being additive to our economy as opposed to sort of taking one from the other or creating more it's competition to a degree, but it's really not. These are fields that no other Maine university or college is involved in to the degree that Northeastern can bring that. And the connection they bring to Boston is, I think, hugely important to Portland. I think, the comparison that I tweeted out at the event the other day was, he suggested that Portland could be the San Jose to Boston's San Francisco. That's a really interesting analogy to me because it's 2 hours away. We are accessible, but there's so much that's great about Portland that our problems in Boston, traffic, cost, all of the stuff associated with that. So I think it's a really big week for Portland and for Maine to have that sort of investment coming about.
Yeah, and we'll put a link in the show notes, but there was a very nice story in the New York Times, too. So that was great.
Talk about PR. The Northeastern knows what they're doing, either that or whoever was working with them, because somebody said to me as I was going to the press conference, which was incredibly well attended by the governor, former governors, mayor, tons of business leaders. It was a really impressive group in the room. But somebody said, "Oh, gee, that's what a shame that they've already given away their big press event. It's already in the New York Times." And I said, "That's not a shame. That is amazing, because if you get the New York Times to advance something, wow." And the Press Herald was a little frustrated, I think, by not being able to get the news, and they sort of dug, and they had an enterprising reporter that did. But the Times had gotten clearly the first look at it. But yeah, what a great opportunity to really showcase something that they positioned as a unique way to drive economic development through philanthropy.
Yes, definitely. Very, very exciting news. Yeah. And I want to bring up the fact that MEMIC is starting its own podcast, or has started its own, The Safety Experts. And we were very honored and privileged to work with your team on branding and getting that kicked off. Tell me about why you did that.
Well, for years, and thank you, your team has been amazing in getting this launched. We couldn't have done it without you. We have lots of content that I don't think people expect insurance companies to have. Nobody goes to an insurance company to feel like they're going to learn something. But the truth is, our brand of workers' comp, the way we sell it, what we sell, and the expertise that we have is really, I think, not your typical insurance company, not your typical workers' comp insurance company. So we have this team of 40 safety professionals who are out doing training, who are really smart, interesting people who have experience, practical experience. They don't come from the insurance industry. We hire people out of the industries that we insure, and then they bring their safety expertise to that work. And they work with many, many customers. So in addition to being experts in their field, they're learning and creating learning communities as they go out into the field and talk with people in different industries about how to deal with certain topics. And so we had a sense that this content was sort of bottled up in these people, these wonderful characters. Actually, many of them are really characters, and that was a great opportunity for us, and I think it's proving to be true. I think that there are some topics that are interesting to people who are not necessarily safety people, who are not in a particular industry. We had a brief conversation earlier about one about Alzheimer's, and from our perspective, we deal with it for nurses who are working with Alzheimer's patients, helping them to understand how to work with these patients so that they keep themselves well physically, but mentally as well, and sort of just what happens, because Alzheimer's is such a huge issue in our society, and we insure a lot of nursing homes and homes where workers are working with those people. But that's an example of the kind of content that's valuable to somebody who has a parent or a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle who they're helping through this really terrible disease, to deal and understand what's happening and to be able to work safely with those people.
Absolutely. And just to share those stories makes it compelling. And podcasting, as we know here with the PR Maven podcast, I mean, you do connect in such a wonderful personal way with so many new people. I mean, I'm so enjoying producing this podcast and hearing from people and kind of growing the PR Maven Nation. So,
yeah, well, you're doing great work. I mean, it is really fabulous. And, I mean, we talked earlier, I mentioned earlier about asking questions, the power of asking questions. I mean, you've honored me by inviting me to do this and to talk about myself and talk about my company. And, I think that just continues the cycle of interest and excitement that you can create from these kinds of conversations. Well,
I was very honored that you accepted my invitation, to be honest, because I know you're busy. You already had a press event, or you had a grand opening or ribbon cutting for your new bike rack this morning.
We did, yeah. We already had an event this morning. Pretty small, pretty informal, but pretty cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. And so you're promoting bike riding to work.
we have, we are located in downtown Portland. That's our home office. And a lot of metropolitan areas, parking is at a premium. And so in addition to that, having a limited amount of parking, we have lots of people who are interested in a sort of a greener lifestyle, certainly a living more healthily. And one great way to do that is to ride your bike to work. And, we have several people who do. I am not one. I live close enough to do it. We were just talking about the logistics of that, how to make that happen, but I will do it. And so creating a simple, secure place for people to be able to keep what is a fairly expensive piece of equipment is smart. There are far too many stories of people's bikes being stolen, even in the middle of, in daylight in the middle of town. So we have now a secure place for 12 bikes where people can keep them outside, and it's a nice. It was a grand opening this morning, even though it was about 10 degrees.
Yeah, cold but sunny and beautiful.
It was. Yeah.
It's kind of my favorite kind of weather. Well, we'll talk about that later. I guess one of the things I love about Maine is the four seasons.
Yes.
Yeah. So, well, we're going to go to break now. We're going to continue the conversation with Mike shortly, but I wanted to share that we have a caller from the PR Maven listener line. And today's message comes from Daryl, who's a member of PR Maven Nation. And we're going to play his question now. And then I'm going to give my response.
Hi, Nancy. It's Daryl from New Sharon. Saw your message about the PR blog. Well, first off, I guess I run an organization that is nonprofit and socially service-oriented. We have about 200 employees. And my question is, how important is it to have the culture of the organization match any public relations information that's going out there into the media? I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
Thanks for your comment and question, Daryl, about the importance of matching an organization's culture to its public relations output. Here are my thoughts. I feel that your public relations absolutely, positively needs to match your organization's culture and brand. One reason is that press releases and public relations efforts are often aimed at media, which means you're sending communications to journalists. And journalists are very smart people with they have a nose for things that are not true, and their radar goes up if they sniff that something is off. And if you send out a press release that is not accurate or that reflects something that is not true, absolutely, then you could really be digging a hole or digging your own grave, essentially, because the media will know and they will follow up tenaciously on something that they think is purely aspirational. Now, if you want to use your public relations to be slightly aspirational to try to raise your organization up, of course, that is fine. But never, ever, ever use your public relations to communicate anything that is not true or the truth. So, Daryl, thank you for calling in and asking your question. And if other members of PR Maven Nation want to call my listener line at 207-620-9075 and record a message like Daryl did, I will share it on the PR Maven podcast and give you my best response. So thanks again, Daryl. Welcome back. And today we're talking with Michael Bourque, who's president and CEO of the Memic Group. And I want to dive right back in with more questions for Mike. So most successful people have a network of fans and followers, either online or in person or both. How have you built your network of fans and followers? And has it been a conscious goal or has it happened on its own?
That's a good question. I'm slightly uncomfortable with the word fans because I don't feel like I have fans. But I understand that certainly people who are in your camp or pay attention to what you're doing online are may be termed as fans. That said, I think it's formed somewhat organically. I think I was a fairly early adopter in a few parts of social media, not sort of bleeding edge, but 10, 12 years ago that I was started on Facebook and LinkedIn and then Twitter 6 or 8 years ago, probably more like 8, maybe it might even be 10 years ago now. I don't know. It's hard to keep track. And so it was built that way. And I felt like it was an important potential. I was in the PR field, I was practicing in the PR field at the time. So I felt it was an opportunity for our company at the time to be probably one of the first insurers who were really paying that much attention to it, and I think that was a way where we started some conversations and did it in a way that, probably my CEO at the time had no idea that we were beginning to delve into this, and might have been uncomfortable if he'd known every bit of it. But I think we saw that it was an opportunity to engage, and that was how we did it. So, I did it through various organizations that I was involved in. By being interested in current events, starting conversations. And I say that with a little bit of trepidation now because we're at such a point where politics and issues are so red hot that, a lot of us like to stay away from those things in social media now. But certainly that was a way that I started. I mean, sort of, began engaging people and having conversations. And I did from the very beginning, I think, understand that this is a public record. Whatever you are creating is there and out there. And so understanding, that you want to engage and have conversations, but being respectful was going to be important. And that was important to my personal brand and certainly to my company. I didn't want to do anything to embarrass either of us in that way. So putting yourself, right next to your organization and understanding that, I think is good, despite, temptations when you might read something and think I need to respond. You don't actually have to walk away for a little bit. But so, I engaged in organizations, local politics, and then industry groups that I was part of. I found quickly connections with national industry groups that I was able to make a fairly quick connection with. because it was a fairly small universe of people, and they were, the national associations were just interested that one of their member groups would be willing to be engaged. And so, the presidents of the National Association of Mutual Insurance Companies, which is has 2,000 members, and we're just one of them. He and I are personal friends, really as a result of our connection that we made in social media. And so it helped become a platform for me outside of social media. I was sort of, I follow him on Twitter and follow his work from Washington. And, he and I he appreciated that I was an early adopter of that, and I appreciated that he was early to me. And so that's continued to this day. And so it was probably not intentional at first, although I knew enough about the potential to I think get started in a smart way, and not to be afraid of it. I think that was important to have some trust in my own ability to navigate the beginning of that, and to do it lightly and with some humor in some ways to start, but to do it.
Good for you. Well, the whole premise of the podcast is that you need to connect with people both online and in person. And so I'm sure, what was this person's name?
Chuck Chamness is his name.
Chuck. So
yeah.
As a result of making this connection online, probably when you see each other in person, it's even better.
It is, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, he I saw him a couple of weeks ago, and we connect all the time, and he wonders about what's happening in politics in Maine because he's in Washington, so he likes to have that connection with what's happening with Susan Collins' election. What's going to happen? What do you think's going to go on there? We have great conversations that frankly, there wouldn't be a way otherwise for us to sort of keep track of each other if not for these really simple, brief messages that may just be a quick scan. They may not even be a reaction to them, but we both know that we're following each other.
That's one of the things I just love so much about one of the many things I love about social media. But I feel like if you meet somebody in person, you should endeavor to connect online to extend the relationship. And if you meet somebody online, you should try to meet in person, because really that's where the magic happens, is in person, because there literally are chemicals that go back and forth between people's brains.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good advice that you give, because that's how it works. I mean, the truth is, I suppose there are a few connections, friends in the Facebook parlance that, I've never met in person. And those are, I would say, strange relationships, because they have the potential to be good relationships. We just don't know. But if you don't connect that with eventually an in-person, I think that does become odd.
I agree. Yeah, and you always wonder, like, if somebody's out there, like, following you that carefully, what is their motive? Are they really who they portray
there's all that.
themselves?
I mean, I'm probably far too trusting of that, but in general. But yes, that's the other point in terms of sort of understanding really who you're dealing with.
Yeah, and of course, both of us have kids, and we wonder how they're using it, and that's a whole other topic for another day.
Yes.
So, Mike, in your line of work, is there a resource such as a book, a website, or an app that you have found helpful, and why is that?
That's a good question. I mean, there are any number of things, I think, that, and in my line of work, sort of, I think, I'm in business. I mean, I would say that's the sort of, as opposed to anything there's all sorts of information that's important to me in insurance, or on the communications PR side, things I've learned. But I think a general openness to learning new things and finding resources to do that are, sort of some of the advice that I talk about people being curious. A single resource or single app, that's a good question. I don't know that I could say, yes, this is you must have this. I think, as I said, sort of with social media, being willing to try lots of things, I think is important. I've never been necessarily the first adopter of anything. I feel like people have this and something, and I go, okay, well, what is that? What are they doing? What is TweetDeck? What do they do with that exactly? Or any sort of those kinds of things. But I think just a willingness to explore is probably the first and most important bits of advice I'd give.
I agree, and especially as one gets older just to stay relevant. Again, that's another part of the premise of this podcast is, you can't just check out. There are some older people who say, I just don't want to do any of that online stuff. And I just think you miss out on so much if you don't engage at all, just as you would miss out if you don't engage in person either. So learning and staying engaged and discovering new things is vital.
I think that's what life is made of when you really think about it.
Absolutely. So do you have a parting thought you'd like to share with PR Maven Nation today?
PR Maven Nation. I guess I would say that the skills that people develop, I think, in the PR world, whether it was before through, in my case, through my journalism career, are life skills, they're professional skills. They really are, or can be, the foundation of a great career, and can take you in a whole bunch of different directions. Not to mention, I think, a set of personal relationships that can be good. And I think, I think PR people, just calling themselves PR people, that shortchanges what they have to offer and what they bring to their organization and their personal lives. You're an engager, you're a communicator, and all of those are skills that I think are just so important. I was invited back to my old school in Aroostook County a few years ago to present to the inductees of the National Honor Society there. I had left there when I was I'd been inducted as a sophomore and left after my junior year and hadn't been back in a long time. But they realized I had a big job with MEMIC and said, would I come? And it was a 5-hour drive. So I said, okay, I'll go. I went and said, but I also said, I don't think they care that much about insurance. And what am I going to talk to these young students about? And what I ended up doing was a talk that I titled Everything I Need to Know in Business I Learned by Being a Sports Writer. And I talked about things like meeting deadlines and spelling people's names right, and having that license to ask questions all the time, about writing as a skill, the importance it's sort of a superpower in business and in life, and decided that really those are things that are generally good in business, that those are things that are going to be useful and helpful to you, and so I think those are skills that you develop on sort of this side of the business world that don't often get translated into the CEO level, but are giant skills that really have put me in the position that I'm in today. So don't shortchange that.
Well, I think another thing about sports writing too is that you're kind of looking for underdogs a lot of the time, and surprise wins, and how did that happen, and where did that kid come from, and how did he get that skill?
The Cinderella story.
Exactly.
That's right. Yes.
So having raised up two very competitive ski racers, one who's still coaching skiing, I still love those stories, and meeting these athletes and hearing how they've just overcome so much in order to perform these great skills and feats.
Yeah, no, there are a lot. I mean, sports has a lot of the stuff of life in it. I mean, struggle and success and celebration. All of that are sort of those are what make great stories. That's why it was a fun job to have. And also, but it translates in lots of parts of life.
Yeah. Now, what town was that in Aroostook County where you?
I was from Ashland.
Ashland,
yes.
Yeah. Near Madawaska?
Well, it's about 20 miles west of Presque Isle. It was the borderland between the potato fields to the east and the Great North Woods to the west.
Well, they were very blessed to have.
I was lucky to grow up there. It was a great place to grow up. It was a great little community.
Well, I'm sure. Have you seen the play Almost Maine?
There's a shout out to Ashland, actually, in Almost Maine.
Yeah.
Yes. There was some. There's some parts of that play that hit home.
I'm sure. Yeah, it was a great play, and it's one of those plays that kind of keeps playing itself out afterwards. That's what I found. Is like some of the play I thought was a little slow moving, but then it came to me the next day. Oh yeah, that was really
Well, they were
Amazing.
universal themes. They were about relationships among usually only two people on stage at a time in those various vignettes. And they were about connection or missed connection and relationship. And probably, you could tie that sort of social media to the meeting in person sort of theme that you talked about earlier to that play in a whole bunch of ways.
Yeah. I think I might have to ask John Cariani if he'd like to be on the PR Maven podcast.
That would be a good thing to do. He's around for a few more weeks, I think. Yeah.
To jump on that opportunity. Well, Mike, this has been so great. I think we could probably go on, but I know you have a job to do.
We'll have to continue this conversation on Damariscotta Lake here sometime this summer.
Yeah, we have that connection too, of course. And we've enjoyed some boating and swimming and fun on the lake, which is just such a beautiful place. I cherish it so much. So if people want to get in touch with you, how can they follow up?
They could follow me on LinkedIn, Facebook, or Twitter. I'm at Mike Bourque on Twitter. Facebook, you'll find me under my name. And if people want to email me, I'm happy to share my email address, mbourque@memic.com.
That's great. We'll share that in the show notes as well. And thank you for coming today. And I hope everybody in PR Maven Nation has a great week. That's it for this week's episode. I'd like to thank you for listening. And if you feel that you've gotten value out of today's conversation, consider leaving a 5-star review on iTunes or whatever app you're using to tune in. If you haven't subscribed yet, you should do so. I release a new episode each week, and subscribing will make sure you get an alert when there's a new episode. You can also join the PR Maven Nation by going to prmaven.com/nation and clicking join. It's free, and it's a great community of like-minded individuals who are all looking to learn and grow from one another. If you have an Alexa-enabled device, be sure to add the PR Maven Marketing Minute to your daily flash briefing menu. Thanks again for listening, and have a great rest of your week, PR Maven Nation.